All right, we're going to get started with our next talk. Again, thank you for silencing your phones. Many of the vendors have already left, so thank you so much for spending time with them. And don't forget those surveys. You've got two sessions left. And now our next talk, I'm excited to learn about, let's see, where are we here? Hacking airports for fun. Please give a warm welcome to Tom Kopchak and Meredith Kasper. Thanks for coming. Welcome.
Thank you, Tom. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see such a good turnout in a big room, and all of you are here to listen to us, which I'm not sure what you're thinking, but thank you for being here. So, hacking airports.
Yes, we like that.
How many of you flew here to Rochester?
Okay,
Not a lot of hands, that's good. We're Midwesterners, we're from Cleveland. We decide everything is a reasonable drive, including driving to Missouri, which was a mistake.
Driving to Maine was a mistake as well.
So, but we recognize airports exist. And airports are things where there's a lot of systems that could be interesting to hack. What we like to do is tell children to hack into systems, not children, but college students, and then we try to see what they can do to break into those systems, find vulnerabilities, report about them, and all of that. And then our job is to keep those systems from getting too horribly destroyed and teach people that, hey, if you do something wrong, that's something you'd rather learn in a production, not a non-production environment. Just like Alyssa said in her keynote yesterday morning, you don't want to break the database delete all the rows in the morning when it's running a company. You want to learn in a sandbox. So we provide that sandbox. So let's set the scene a little bit. Think about if you have an airport and you want to do security on that. We'd love to have a case where you have an airport that is a real airport that we can do testing. For some reason, no one let us use an airport. I don't understand.
Yeah, we tried.
We tried, we asked, and no one was like, hey, you can just ground all the flights for a weekend and it'll be cool to just have you pen test the actual airport. And it's really disappointing. But we did the next best thing. We made our own, and then we tried to monitor everything that we could. So how does this apply to you? Well, what we want to do is walk you through the story of how we create a fake company, how we implement a bunch of security monitoring, and how we take that security monitoring and use it in the real world based on the data that we collect. So, who the heck are us? Well, I'm Tom. I'm the Director of Technical Operations at a company called Hurricane Labs based out of Cleveland and Ohio. We do a lot of Splunk and security monitoring. You're going to hear me mention things about Splunk and things like that. This is not a vendor talk, but that's the tool I'm familiar with. And then I'm an RIT alum and one of the founders of the CPTC competition.
I'm Meredith. I also work at Hurricane Labs with Tom. I am their Director of Technical Services, and my job is primarily to just break things on a day-to-day basis and make somebody else like you fix it. Sorry. I am a former CPTC competitor, and one of the reasons I got involved was for the monitoring side because my team used to do some sketchy stuff, and I am also one of the competition directors.
The one thing Meredith is not telling you is like 48 hours ago, she was in the ER.
Yeah, I paused my ER stay to be here, which is great.
So we're hopefully going to do the best we can and survive that. She has the Hospital Fast Pass Plus right there. So if you need to be able to do that, we're going to try to avoid any of that. But if anything happens, it'll make this talk a little bit more exciting. But we have to learn to pivot in this industry. So that is something that we will learn.
All right, what is CPTC?
Yes. So basically, the idea of CPTC is we want to combine the importance of knowing about how to operate technically, but also how to operate in a business environment. How do you communicate professionally with other people who are maybe not as technical? How do you share that knowledge in a way that someone else can understand what you're doing? So we blend business, offensive security together and provide an educational experience to students. And it has become the premier offensive security collegiate testing competition. And it is something where we provide a company and they do that testing. It's been going on for 10 years and it's been great. So, anything I missed there?
Just the fact that it started down the road at RIT?
Yeah, started at RIT. We've had great support from companies like IBM and that to give us the dollars, and they keep their hands off and let us build stuff, which is awesome.
All right, so let's talk about some of the previous themes that we've had for CPTC. And every year, as Tom mentioned, we build a new fictitious company from the ground up, and that means the personalities of the people involved to the infrastructure and systems. So this year, we are a social media company. We are We Croissant, which is basically a larger holding company with products. And then last year, which is the year we'll be talking about, we were an airport.
Yep.
And then Tom, I know you were very involved in the earlier years that we have here.
Yeah, so we've been like a hotel, candy manufacturing company. We are a public utility, next generation power, electric, and water. Dino Bank, a financial institution. We did Wheels, a transportation app, an elections provider for Gotham elections. So we've gone through all kinds of different themes. It's funny, the elections provider thing, you notice that's 2017. That's like 3 years before all of the election hacking stuff really went to hell. So it was great to see we are doing this stuff as it becomes relevant. Another question, like how many of you have heard of CPTC? Handful of you. We have any former competitors here? No. Okay, so that's cool. None of you know what we're talking about, so that is awesome. We can start this from the ground up. So like one of the times we actually were like sitting at the Bellagio buffet in Vegas in 2019, right around DEF CON time, and we're like, how do we make this more real? And then like within the next hour, we're looking for ATMs on eBay, and we found like 12 of them. I drove a truck to Cincinnati. This was actually our first time we were on a road trip, so she didn't realize how big a box truck is.
I didn't realize how large a 26-foot box truck was.
Yes.
That's my own mistake.
Yes. But that was the most cost-effective way to get those to Rochester. I drove that up there, and then we had to figure out how to make this work. These don't support AWS natively for whatever reason. Dial-up modems don't do that, so we had to write all the software to do that. It was awesome, and we were actually able to give students hands-on experience hacking a real ATM that we bought. We also get some great experience of actually seeing how systems work. So like when we went to the airport, we actually went to a real airport in Pittsburgh, their international airport. They took us underneath the the train that goes between the terminals. And we actually were standing there, and we could see this happen. We were inside there, walking around the airport with hard hats and vests on. They took apart part of the stuff, were showing us all of the communication, stuff like that. We used that to model the actual people nervous system that we used last year for the competition. So it has been a great experience to actually see how a lot of these things work and then try to replicate them for the students. Let's talk about vulnerabilities.
Yes, so as we've mentioned, every year we build this environment from the ground up. Each new year means new environment, new vulnerabilities, and of course, old vulnerabilities that are coming back from the past, because I'm sure, as you all know, no vulnerability ever really, really goes away, because some old system's going to end up getting deployed, and surprise, it's back in your environment again. But every year we have the business hosts that run the infrastructure for each system, and for each team, they have their own entire environment that is completely separate, that has a working Active Directory, the systems that are the different, okay, now I'm forgetting what they are.
Oh, so like just there's the business systems, but there's
Yes.
also the workstations. We have the custom applications for the business, all kinds of different things for that. So just like you would see, you walk in any organization, you don't know exactly what they're going to have. We try to replicate that and create different environments for different types of companies.
Yep, and as we've said, like each year there are tons of vulnerabilities. We usually end out the year with knowing about 150 vulnerabilities that our wonderful infrastructure apps teams put into the environment. But as teams are going through and pen testing, they find vulnerabilities that we didn't know existed. And so those get added to the list. And you can see that we've done a very good job at redacting one of our samples of vulnerabilities that we maintain in a spreadsheet, but this is just a small subset of what we see every year.
And one of the awesome things is we use a lot of open source tools to be like products within the environment. And the great thing about that is there are CVEs that come out of this that go into improving projects that people actually use. So there's at least like 5 or more CVEs that have come out of CPTC, including ones in like actual commercial products like Splunk, for example. There's a CVE that's been solved as a result of CPTC, which we didn't even realize until stuff started breaking, and then we found a legitimate problem with the product, which is awesome. But some of the time, students have actually worked with the vendors of products to get things fixed that they find during the event. So that has been awesome to see as well. And then likewise, never really know what you're going to find because of how we do that. So the story. When I got involved with this, I wanted to see how I can justify this with my leadership. It's like, I want to spend a lot of time doing this cool thing. What can I do to help, like, so that you can allow me to spend a lot of time on that? The company we work for, we do a lot of logging and security alerting. And I'm like, let's come up with a way to log everything and use this as an actual way to improve security detection and monitoring across the industry. So Splunk, that's our preferred tool of choice. It's because that's something I'm familiar with, and a lot of the other people who work in the environment do that. But you can use whatever tool you want to collect data. We put agents on all the systems to log all of the things that we can. And if there is data that exists, or a log that might exist, or something that we can try to get data on, we do that. And then we just turn it up to like 12 so that we can get very high fidelity data, probably a little bit beyond what you'd realistically see at a large corporation. But we are collecting upwards of 3 or 4 terabytes of data on the Saturday where this event runs in order to see as much visibility as we can. And that allows us to support everything that we can kind of see in the environment and ultimately have like 4 or 6 different ways to see everything that happens. So if somebody says, hey, we didn't do that, we can be like, well, we have 4 different log sources that said you did that, so pretty good chance that you did.
And we do bring receipts, quite literally.
Yeah, so you've seen logs before on screen. Has anyone ever printed out logs before? By accident or on purpose? A couple of you. What we do is we give them CVS receipt style on a long paper. And then we will say, like, a team would be like, hey, we didn't do that. And we like, there's this scroll that we unwind of like, here is all the logs of something like that. Sometimes these are just like your normal CVS receipt, 20 feet long or longer like that. Teams, like, they actually really enjoy that because it's like a physical representation of what they did, and they hang it up in their room, and then we're like, yeah, not sure why you're doing this, but hey, whatever makes you happy.
All right, so let's talk about some of the key source types. And source types are log sources that go into Splunk. And these are some of the typical ones that we collect during every competition. So first are stream logs, which are traffic logs. We collect HTTP, DNS, TCP, and UDP. Whatever we can get, we'll pull it in. We grab the Win event logs. We primarily focus on security, but we do grab the application and system as well for some of the troubleshooting, especially as we spin up environments. Next, we collect Sysmon for both Windows and Linux, just for process logging. And if for anybody here, has anybody used Sysmon for Linux since it came out? You don't count. But Sysmon for Linux is a treasure trove of information, and it does such a wonderful job, similar to how it does on Windows. And that's become so instrumental for us in building better detections, as we'll talk about later. Then we have Windows Netmon for traffic logs by process. We've got bash history and PowerShell transcript logging, so every time a team types in a command, we can see it. And we've got some wonderful dashboards that I think were started by you, and our monitoring team has expounded upon greatly to see every single command across every single host running so that we can look and see what every team is doing at any given moment. And then, of course, we have Office 365 admin and message trace logs to log what teams are doing through the OneDrive accounts that we provision them. And then we have AWS logs for the resources that we have up in the cloud. And then, Tom, what's really stupid file integrity monitoring?
Oh, I would never recommend doing this. But basically, we monitor any sort of changes to the file system in certain directories. So like if you run a scan and it drops it into your home directory, we will ingest that into Splunk so we can see like the full output of your like scan and things like that. Do not do this in production ever. It is stupid, but it kind of works in this case.
So how many terabytes of data do we usually get during an entire CPTC season?
A whole season. I mean, it's like 3 to 4 terabytes per event, so 20 terabytes or so total. It's on par with like one of our Fortune 500 customers, at least for a day. And yeah, you also have PSN Netstat, and we'll collect that. And we do that like every 5 seconds or something like that. So if someone runs a command, we can actually see not only the process logs, but all of the other process arguments that happen as well, which is really useful for investigations.
All right, so let's talk about the theme for this past year, CPTC 9, which was the Robert A. Kalka Metropolitan Skyport, or RAKMS, because we are lazy and we like to just use the acronym.
And we really wanted KMS in the name, so we spent a lot of time doing that.
Yes, for the wonderful key management system that I don't think we ended up implementing.
Yeah, it's fine.
It's fine, though. So Robert A. Kalka Metropolitan Skyport was located in Springfield. And Tom, if you wouldn't mind kicking off the wonderful video we have.
Yeah, we'll do the video. What Meredith's not going to tell you, she spends way too much time making fake companies exist and includes branding like this.
Welcome to the Robert A. Kalka Metropolitan Skyport, where the future of travel unfolds before your very eyes. We invite you to experience a journey like no other, where innovation meets human connection. Say goodbye to long lines and paperwork. Our smart check-in kiosks make the process a breeze. Our terminals use real energy, with every detail designed to minimize our environmental footprint. Taste Springfield at our culinary hub. From casual bites to gourmet delights, our diverse dining options satisfy every palate. Robert A. Kalka Metropolitan Skyport is more than a place. It's a meeting point for people from all Springfields across the globe. Experience the beauty of diverse connections from Springfield to Gary, Indiana. With multiple airlines and multiple flight options, experience our futuristic joy of an airport today. We'll see you in Springfield.
And we're still really not sure which Springfield we were in, but we can confirm that we were in one of them, I think.
And funny thing, when we drove to Springfield, Missouri, we drove through like 2 other Springfields to get to Springfield, Missouri, so there's a lot of Springfield. So it was a fun joke, and also we try to make things, realistic and all that. But I love the branding and stuff you do. It really makes everything come together as like you are actually working with the company and get that experience. Teams produce OSINT online, so there's like profiles on social media and a bunch of other things like LinkedIn, Facebook, GitHub posts, all kinds of different things for these organizations that can be part of the realism of the event that we create. But speaking of realism, since no one would let us use an actual airport, we had to build our own. And simulating different airport systems is challenging.
Yeah, so we had the People Mover, which I know we had the video of. That was really one of the main things for the teams to highlight going after. But of course, as we are an airport, we also had baggage claim, we had a ticketing system, we had radios, and then we also had multiple airlines. And then we also built out all of the world and open source intelligence on those airlines as well. Because one thing you'll learn about CPTC is if we can do it, we're going to take it up to 11 or 12 rather than just going and staying full speed at 10. And then with that airport, we also built out alerts for activity that teams were performing that would have impacted the airport operations, whether that was something minute like changing one end user's password all the way up to halting production or taking down a domain controller. And then one of the things that we'll get into is that we leverage automation to make our lives easier because we are, 1, lazy, and 2, that made our lives so much easier when we needed to respond to something quickly.
Because you can think about how many alerts you might get in your company if someone launches off a pen test or if there's some kind of abnormal activity. When you think about it, when you have like 60 different people doing a pen test all at the same time, it gets noisy, especially with the level of logging that we do. So, do teams ever happen to say let's just say we see something bad happen, like an account gets locked out, or maybe you scan something out of scope or on the public internet. They're always really forthcoming about them doing that and we made a mistake, right?
No. And usually, as Tom mentioned earlier, we'll get a lot of "it wasn't us" or "you can't prove that this was us." And as we mentioned from our key source types and some of the ones we've called out here, we know it was you. We can see it was you. And I know that you've had some examples where you've quite literally pulled up who is sitting on host number 3 on the Windows side. Yeah, you. Show me your command history, and just walking into a room to validate.
Yeah, and it's weird where the way these environments are set up, we have, let's just say 10 teams competing at the same time. Every single team is their own set of VMs. So you have 10 environments that are identical. There's no one else inside your environment besides you. So you can't argue that some other thing happened, except for that one time we misconfigured the firewall rules and China got into every single system. But we won't talk about that. That provided a realistic threat actor inside of all the teams.
But it was also fair because they did compromise everyone
and
the same way.
And we had the logs to prove that
Yes,
as well,
we
that they were all compromised equally. So that was lovely. But those sorts of things, it's great for us to see that visibility, but also great for the students to see, hey, when you do something, there is watching that is happening, and this is what data exists. And speaking of data that exists, Bash history is fun because teams sometimes decide they know we're watching, so they decide to use this as an opportunity to communicate with us. So this is an example from about 2 years ago where a person was just sending Bash commands of saying, hey, we need help, we need help. So how did we deal with that?
Well, those of us on the monitoring team, we had a good chuckle. We thought about it for a second. We took a look at some of the other commands they were running, and we sent somebody to the room within 5 minutes to help them. And they ended up making it all the way to finals. So, we do have oversight into a bit of everything that they do, but if you ask nicely and through the command line, we are more than happy to provide support.
Yeah, and we'll see Easter eggs like this sometimes. It just makes us laugh when when your SOC is spending all the day watching everything. Sometimes you need a chuckle a little bit.
All right, so we mentioned that we have a lot of repetitive alerts across all the different teams. And one thing that I don't believe we've touched on yet is really the number of participants that we have every season. And that's over 500 pen testers who are trying to show all the skills that they have pen testing these systems at the exact same time over the span of 3 weekends. So that's 550 or so, at a minimum 1 alert per person. And we have 8 people in our SOC, maybe?
Yeah. Now, it's 8 people dedicated to this, but how many of you work in a SOC in some capacity? A couple of hands. If you're getting, 400 or 500 alerts for 8 people in like a 6-hour period or something, you're going to be sad. So how do we do that? Automation! Wait, automation! Yeah, so how do we use automation?
All right, so we automate incident response. And one of the biggest banes of our existence every single year is monitoring what teams are doing in pulling either open source tools from GitHub or tools that they've developed themselves. So it was a really good detection, and it was one that was spun up, I think partially due to my team way back when, where we used to pull our scripts from GitHub. And one of the things that you'll learn is we have a lot of former competitors on the monitoring team who went, we used to do this sketchy thing. Nobody else should be able to get away with it, so we're going to come help write a detection. And that's also how we pull in more logs.
And just to be clear, the issue here is you're allowed to use public things on GitHub repos. So if someone makes a tool that has existed for years, something generally available, that's fine. We also have repos that are available specific to teams where they can make stuff public. We just don't want teams to hide things in repos that no one else can find or develop tools and hide it under the radar. So that's the issue we're looking for from a rules perspective.
Yes. And for this one, we've pulled the numbers here from our finals competition, which is a 2-day competition, and there were 15 teams, and we had 378 true positive detections that we needed to make sure that we had eyes on for every single one. And with 15 teams, that's about 20 times that a team is going to GitHub and pulling something down. And the investigation process is very repetitive, since you're going to GitHub, looking at a link, checking to see if it's private or not, or if it's something that's within our expected and allowed list. So we have some wonderful members of our monitoring team who love to automate, and they determined that this was a great candidate for SOAR. And you'll see the correlation search that we have down at the bottom below, but if you wouldn't mind flipping. Within about the span of 45 minutes and a lot of caffeine, they wrote the first version that we have here of our GitHub activity, and that correlation search turned into an automated playbook. And there are a couple decision trees within there checking for whether or not that GitHub repo is public or private, as well as whether or not it's in the repo that we provide to teams. And if it's not, then it would raise an alert to our SOC for somebody to actually go through and handle versus just having to have eyes on every single one. And then if you wouldn't mind flipping. Thank you very much. Before automation, we had 312 of these come in within there. And it takes us about 20 minutes to go through and handle that, because these aren't the only alerts firing during the day of the competition. There are other things that we also have to put eyes on and may also need to prioritize over the GitHub. So we had, about an average response time of 20 minutes to investigate. And then with automation, we did see more of those come in. We saw more teams utilizing GitHub during finals, but the average time to close on that was 13.8 minutes. And that number for average time to close is for all of the alerts there, with about 95% of them handled by automation at that point.
And I think we were only polling every 10 minutes as well, so that was part of the reason for it taking a bit. We just didn't want to kill APIs, but to be able to automate basically 95% of that type of an alert and not require human interaction except when there is something that looked weird, that's a great case for automation. So as you're thinking about like what you deal with professionally, is there something where there's always the same process where I can boil it down to like a playbook of steps like this where you can go, this is what I have to do every single time. Save your human resources for something that you actually have to think about as opposed to letting the machine collect that prior.
All right, so what's the worst thing that you've seen happen during a pen test, actually?
I think it was related to when a company you were working with challenged you to break their manufacturing systems and said, we'd like to see if you could break it.
Yeah, that was fun. I got challenged to take down what was a manufacturing plant that, first of all, nobody actually told me was a live plant. And second of all, nobody told me that the location was outside the US, so what I presumed were off hours were on hours. And that was some 100 million something in damages. But they were happy that I was able to prove that I could halt that. However, they then also had to go clean all that up.
And we were happy she had permission in writing for that.
Yes.
But how many of you have had pen tests before? How many of you have seen something bad happen during a pen test? Is anyone comfortable sharing anything that you've seen that's bad? In the back? Oh, not communicating there's a pen test? Yeah, that's.
You start seeing all the things firing off, you're thinking there's a major incident going on, only to find out communication hasn't happened.
Rules of engagement, knowing what's going on. We've never seen that for customers ever, where, holy pen test, Batman, you know?
Determining the fragility of the system. So like an ICS SCADA system, you do a ping sweep, and it's going to go offline.
Exactly. When we've done ICS systems, that's exactly the way we simulate that. So like the hydroelectric dam, for example, if you send bad traffic to it, next thing you know, there's a flood and FEMA's there. So that was one of the things we tried to simulate for that as well, yeah.
You shouldn't be intrusive, but all of a sudden you are.
Yes. All the way in the back.
Something that was technically not on campus but was connected CCTV area, not secured, plugged in, goes right to their main actual company's network.
Oh, were you in a pen test class that I taught at a university a couple of years ago? Because that same exact thing happened. It happened for a local university for me, and it sounds very similar. But I don't think you were, so that's weird. Apparently, that's standard operating procedure with CCTV systems.
I took down a bank's print servers.
Oh.
And I had a colleague who took down a bank's mainframe.
Bank's mainframe going down, Bank's print servers, all bad things. Although, so let's talk about another thing. No one brought this one up yet, but how many of you have heard of zero login? Some of you, okay.
So,
Take it away.
Thanks. So as we mentioned, we have an Active Directory environment that the students are pen testing against. So in this environment, we had a vulnerable domain controller with remote authentication enabled because, of course, we want to give the students a chance to attack this domain controller and go after it with everything they've got. And we have, with zero logon, you've got some poorly implemented net logon crypto, which allows for pretty much some nonsense to be guessable. And at this point, zero logon is a Metasploit module, so pretty much anybody who knows how to run Metasploit will go after that. And with running the exploit, you become the domain admin, password set to an empty string, and if you then decide to reboot that domain controller or say you have an active production environment and you have a reboot or patching cycle where at some point that system is going to go offline, restart, and come back on, once that system reboots, oh, congratulations, your domain's not working anymore. And your users get angry, and your company has a bad time. And the reason we're bringing this up is because we had 7 teams.
Well, wait, before we do that, no one would actually run zero logon in a production domain controller during a pen test, right? That would never happen.
Would it?
They did. So yeah, I think it was about 7 teams for that sort of thing.
Yeah, we had 7 teams, and immediately we started to notice, hey, a lot of systems are going offline, and we were looking in Splunk, just seeing, we have a giant dashboard that shows the availability of every service and every host that runs throughout the entire competition. And we see a huge batch of domain controllers go red on the start of the second morning, and the monitoring team immediately starts to look for, okay, something's going on here, and it's either an infrastructure issue that's affecting the host that's outside the scope of the competition, or all of the teams have done the same thing and something's gone wrong.
And it was so widespread of an issue when half of the systems are broken. We thought we screwed something up.
And
we didn't.
This time we didn't.
This time.
So the members of the monitoring team started to look for a few different things, and somebody came up with, oh, I think I see the zero logon Metasploit module being run on this host the evening before. All right, I'm going to start looking for that. Somebody else started looking for system reboots and seeing if they just weren't coming back after a reboot. And then we had somebody else looking at the logs for all the failed services they were seeing across all those hosts. And then we also had simulated reports from the different end users that we had on those systems where they were no longer able to authenticate, and that was something we were monitoring for as well. And we combined all of those together to start monitoring for which teams did a zero logon attack against the production domain controllers.
And this is a perfect example tying back to Alyssa Miller's presentation yesterday morning, where it's better to learn that this is bad to do in production when you're in RAKMS's airport as opposed to like LaGuardia. So that is something you learn here. We have the opportunity to not simulate, we actually can tell the teams, hey, this is bad, and they get that experience of being yelled at by a customer. But that's something that you learn, and then when you go off to be a pen tester in the real world, you see, oh, I had this bad experience, I'm not gonna do that again. I've learned from making a mistake.
Now, to be fair, though, we do come from Cleveland, where we have been ransomwared 4 times in the last 3 years for our airport, and from some of the reports that have come out of it, no changes have been made to the infrastructure.
So Cleveland is a leader in something when it comes to... So let's tie this big picture. You're security professionals, we're security professionals. How do we make this all go full circle into security? Well, we have a lot of security alerting that's going on in the environment. We use Splunk's Enterprise Security SIM for alerting within the environment and have more than 35 active correlation searches that are running looking for things. What are some of the stuff we detect?
So some of the things that we've called out here are account lockouts. We look for DNS tunneling for competition integrity reasons to make sure that teams aren't exfiltrating the systems and getting a leg up in the off hours. We're looking for any sort of unexpected authentication and logons, both from the characters that we create as well as access to the jump boxes that they are given. We are looking for scanning of public IPs and anything that may or may not be out of scope. We're also looking for outbound transfers, password changes, and within that 35 correlation searches number, we also have a wonderful catch-all that is known as risk-based alerting, where we throw whatever correlation searches we can in there with some risk to just see exactly what's generating, but we don't necessarily need to have our SOC having eyes on it 24/7 for 300 searches. We'll
But
group
if
it
you
into
see a
one.
lot of those risks, they bubble up, and you can say, oh, this is something that looks like risky, questionable behavior, and we need to talk to someone about it.
So talking through some of those correlation searches, and the one we have down here on the screen is for our zero logon detection, but we look for account lockouts, deleting accounts, changing passwords, and then all of that was built together to show using zero logon on a domain controller.
So next, we're going to step you through a couple different scenarios that we have for different sorts of bad pen testing behaviors, rules violations, and talk about how we detect these things, how it's something that you might be able to take what we use in this competition environment and apply it to a professional setting as well. So first, account lockouts. How many of you have ever dealt with people locking out their passwords? Yes. How many times that happens because of something actually bad? Yes, it happens too. So that's something we see for clients as well. But a common mistake, someone tries to run a brute force password attack against a whole bunch of systems. It locks out a ton of accounts. Bad things happen. Users aren't able to get done or get work done. We can use the Windows authentication logs to identify that. And Meredith, you'll talk about the searches that we have for it.
Yeah, so we have 2 correlation searches that we focus on for this. First is our account lockout search, and that's one that is publicly available on our website. For Hurricane Labs, we have a cybersecurity blog, and we like to share the knowledge. So if you use Splunk, you are more than welcome to take advantage of the search. But it alerts on any accounts in the environment being locked out, and there is a threshold that you can, of course, adjust there. But it is the same logic that we use within our client environments as well. And the goal is to identify any sort of password spraying, mass lockouts, and every time we see, a large number of account lockouts spike, we go reach out and engage with the teams to see exactly why they are performing behavior that would be impacting users on their domain. And then similarly, we also monitor for unexpected password changes. And as somebody has called out the rules of engagement, it's usually not within scope to start changing users' passwords during a pen test, especially if they're active users of your organization. So once again, we built a custom correlation search to detect whenever a password was changed of somebody who we deemed to be an active user and somebody who shouldn't be changing their password on a Saturday at 10 a.m. during this pen test. And we do make the assumption that none of our users would ever know to change their passwords anyway, since we are a large airport and very busy. But we have, of course, adapted that to a little bit more specific to the scenario, but that alert logic can be tweaked for customer environments and for you all to use.
Yeah, and where we see this is like if you have a break glass account or something that shouldn't ever change, or at least if it does change, you are going to know that it's going to change. That's a good case where, hey, this account that should never be used had a password change, no one knows why. Hey, we need to drop everything and investigate that. That's kind of where this comes into a correlation search that you can use in a real environment. So next, competition integrity alerting. So exfiltrating data. Sometimes students will try to take host out of the environment, take custom apps, send it somewhere else so that they can analyze it between events and get an unfair advantage. And that's something where we obviously don't want to have that happen. So we can use things like the Splunk stream logs to identify that using a couple other correlation searches.
Yep, and the correlation search that we have for a large outbound transfer sums up the bytes out by source IP, and then it basically alerts us when more than a gigabyte is exfiltrated out to a public IP address or domain. And then that is a search that we developed during CPTC with all of the logs that we have available there. And then we're able to retool that into some of our client environments where they may have those same logs. And that is something that has pretty much allowed us to continue doing CPTC with our company not really minding that we spend all of our waking hours doing something fun and also work-related. And then we also have a DNS tunneling search, and I know this one was the fault of my team way back when, as that is how we did some sketchy things. But we used some of the built-in tools in Splunk to develop the correlation search here, and this is also another one that we have deployed into any client environment where they are using Splunk Stream for DNS.
Yeah, and it's a big concern to be able to detect that inside of environments, so having those logs and be able to say, hey, you might have DNS tunneling happening in your environment. This is an alert that we can use. So, zero login. We talked a little bit about this already, but using the Windows authentication logs, we can identify if a team is breaking authentication.
Yep, and so here are all the steps that we actually put into building out our zero logon activity search. And so it alerts on suspected zero logon activity without specifically looking at the command line, since we know that most people out in the real world won't have the luxury of being able to afford an insane Splunk license or Cisco license at this point with bash history logs, PowerShell logs, command line logs, and then whatever else you can pull in. So we are using that primarily done based on Windows event codes and looking for password changes, system reboots, and then services going down. And this proved to be a very effective validation of the logic that we tested as teams continued to perform zero logon activity throughout the competition.
And this is, that last bullet point on the left is a really important call out because you're not going to see zero, or you're hopefully not going to see zero login in a bunch of customer environments. How do you detect, or how do you prove that this alert is working? We can use this data set to say, hey, this search works. In these cases, we can effectively detect when someone runs this. Then we can put that across all of the customer environments we work with, and they have a tested search that is able to detect that activity, that if it goes off there, it's like, we got to drop everything and help you identify that issue. And last example, out of scope activity. So if a team, for example, tries to scan a system that's not within the authorized scope, maybe a public website or another system outside of the proper IP range, we want to be able to identify that because obviously violating scope is a huge issue. Rules of engagement, like you mentioned. We don't want to have that happen, and we want students to know that. So how do we detect that?
So we detect that with a couple different correlation searches. First is port scanning of public IPs. And we're just looking for a large number of different ports against an IP address that isn't within the RFC 1918 space. That is one that we have deployed for a very long time, and it catches those scope violations very early on. And one of the other reasons that we'll want to make sure that we have these detections in place is to make sure that the IP addresses on the hosting infrastructure that we're using also don't get blacklisted, because that's coming from a university, and it would be terrible for them to end up on some sort of blacklist over fictitious pen test activity. And then we're also looking for directory brute force of any public IP address as well. As we build out the world and scenario information, we'll build out a company website. And it's always important to know whether or not there's an internally hosted version that's within scope versus one that's publicly out online, and which one you are actually choosing to attack. And that is something that we press on students every single year and make sure that they are focusing on attacking what is within scope and where they should be focusing their activity versus something out in the internet in public.
And some teams have learned, like, they'll go ahead and put host firewall rules in their scanning boxes so it cannot actually touch other things outside of the scope. And that's just a good practice so that you don't accidentally make a mistake in case DNS is wrong or you fat finger a command, you don't at least have a control to protect that. Not everyone does, but it's something that we have at least seen teams do and learn from. So what do we learn as a result of doing that? Well, it's a lot. This year, with automation being something that we added in there, it's super useful. And to kind of have that mindset of what is repetitive, what are things where we can save human resources to actually focus on real investigations and use automation to make that more efficient. That's been a huge takeaway.
Yeah, next up has been collecting more data, whatever we can get from whatever systems, and always making sure that we want to collect that in the most efficient route possible. And there are always more ways that we can get that data in and get that visibility so that if one source type happens to fail, we have a fallback so we can always see exactly what's going on. And then, of course, understanding all of the scaling challenges and the additional requirements that are going to come with pulling in all of that data so rapidly and then having people leverage that pretty much right away.
Yeah, and like the way we deploy this Splunk environment, I would cringe to do at any customer because of the lack of resources, but we do the best we can with that and try to be as efficient as we can and use some techniques in order to make that less of a drain on all the systems. It's still not great, but it gets things done. Process logging. That is something that has been super useful, like the WinNetMon logs, where you can actually see the network traffic associated with various processes in the argument. Super useful to identify everything that's happening. And the fact that we see both sides, the attacker side and the target side, where you can see not only this is the command that results in this traffic leaving this box that was received on this port on the system that was handled in this way. Just that full visibility of everything going on is super useful for being able to identify what's happening. Not always practical to collect everywhere, so I can't say, like, go home and turn on full logging of all the processes in all your systems. Like, you're definitely going to have budget issues if you do that. So that's something that I can't say you can do everywhere. But for, like, high-value targets, like production systems that are public-facing, for example, maybe your CEO's laptop, those are some systems where having that level of visibility for a high-value target could be super useful.
All right. And then one of the things that we learned is we love the dashboards, and when we are on site for finals, we are at RIT in the cyber range. Has anybody had a chance to see the cyber range?
Isn't that awesome? Does that room even look real? Like, you're sitting in here like, this just seems like an AI rendering of a classroom. I'm like, no, but I'm here. It's amazing.
And we leverage the, I think what we can only call a jumbotron within there to have all of the dashboards up. So we can see the, batch history of all 15 teams up at once in one corner, right next to all of the hosts and their services, next to the ticketing system for any things that teams are reaching out to us with, and then having some additional fun. And of course, you have to have music on the side as well. And so what we've determined is we need more dashboards so that we can fill the entire room and then maybe push them out to the screens as well.
And this is one of those cases where having real-time searches on a dashboard is almost more efficient than having a bunch of people running the same searches on 9 different SOC analysts at the same time. So this is one of the cases where everyone staring at the single pane of glass or something like that comes across quite better and helps us save some resources, but often not practical from a realistic perspective. But we do actually use the big pew-pew screen for something useful, unlike a lot of different SOCs that happen sometimes.
Yes, and then after the fact, we use all of the data that we collect to go back and really build out an analytic story of what has occurred in the environment, what the attack paths are that teams are taking, and we go and see what different areas they pivot down, and we like to see what rabbit holes they like to go in, what particular targets they like to focus in on. And it's interesting to see how the different teams work and make that happen.
And then we work in the space of providing security services for customers. How do we make this big picture? How is this something that you can use? And all of that. So the correlation searches we develop have real applications. We've talked about a couple, like 4 different examples, but more than 30 of these have become things that we actually deploy in a ton of different customer environments. And the fact that we can improve stuff using data that we know something bad is happening is awesome, because there is a way to validate search logic. We have the CPTC data set that's available, and that's something that we'll talk about as well. But basically, all of this data that we collect is something that's publicly available. You can go to the RIT mirrors and download it. And so if you need, like, I want to see what Windows logs look like when someone's running zero login, you can download that, get all of the Windows logs, and actually run your own searches against that. And that is something that's really hard to find, and it's something we make available to anyone to just download, which is fabulous. There's a app for Splunk that we've developed using the CPTC data for PowerShell logging. That's something like you see, like commands that are embedded into encoded commands into PowerShell. It'll help you identify those sorts of things. And that's something that has become basically the gold standard now for collecting PowerShell logs that we developed out of that. Validating search logic.
Yeah, just going through and validating any correlation search that you have. And as I mentioned earlier, we have pulled all those in through risk-based alerting so that we're not going to have to deal with all of it, but that way we've got it all there, and we're using that data whenever we want to go back and take a deeper look. And then this supports the company's continuous improvement initiatives, where we're allowed to go and perform some professional development and, you know, hopefully stay mildly relevant versus being a director and having no fun.
So last, I know we didn't have any competitors watching, but if you happen to see this and you're cheating, let us know so we can write better detections, because that's why we have people like Meredith and the rest of the monitoring team, former competitors. They know what they did. If you like Splunk, want to get more involved with that, you can join our monitoring team, and we'll be happy to have you be part of that. This happens just this time of year and also in January at RIT. We also can use help for building applications, developing the world scenario, like basically anything to make a company happen. So this is a great volunteer opportunity. Also, link at the bottom, mirror.rit.edu CPTC. You can download that data set. There is 2018 to 2023 data is all there for each year. If you need data to look at for something realistic or to ingest into whatever tool you want to use, it is there. And then that pretty much wraps it up. So if we have time for a couple questions, if any of you have any, but thank you so much for your time, and hopefully this was useful.
Do you want to take any questions?
Yeah, we can take any
We
questions.
can probably take 1 or 2 questions. Anybody? Okay, well, thank you.
I'm sorry?
How bad were the airports, Tom?
For the ones that we created?
Yeah, so, I mean, were your testers able to actually stop flights, screw stuff?
Yeah.
What was the end result?
So end result, there were a lot of bad things that they were able to identify. So like the People Mover, for example, had an interface or an HMI interface where if you touched a button or sent a command to it, it would actually cause the thing to stop in an unauthenticated way. That was something that could be a life safety issue. If you stop a People Mover in a place where there's no accessibility, that's a problem. Did we have to ground all flights at some point?
We did have to ground a couple of flights.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, we did have to ground a fair few flights for a fair few teams as they decided to mess with the arrivals and departures and change some of the times.
And
We did have baggage sent to the wrong baggage claim.
yeah. And just in terms of vulnerabilities, I think last year we ended up with 170-ish vulnerabilities that teams found. And some of those could be, one team found that vulnerability. Other cases, we had like 40 or 50 teams find like really obvious low-hanging fruit things. So pretty much everyone can. We design it in such a way you can just stumble into the environment. You will find vulnerabilities, but there are also other things that are more complex as well. Yeah.
So was this model taken when you did the presentation? Was it taken to the airports and say, look at, or stuff you need to look at in your environment?
So the simulation is the teams will produce a pen test report that has recommendations. Sometimes for the finals competition, we'll actually fix a lot of stuff. So like one year we fixed like the top 40 vulnerabilities, and then teams were really like, this is harder now. I'm like, yeah, that's how pen testing works when your customer fixes things. But at finals, we also have a presentation to the board of directors. So we'll have a bunch of industry professionals come in, be the board, and the students will have to give a presentation at an executive level saying, hey, these are the vulnerabilities we found. These are some of the critical issues you should look at addressing. Here's how your security posture is, right, compared to other industries we look at.
One more question, how comfortable would you feel having this actually work in an airport without causing problems, just being able to identify the problem without actually causing a problem, like stop the sidewalk, or have the baggage claims, just totally shut down, or having somebody twiddle a flight mistaken?
So I think we would be crazy to have unexperienced pen testers just dropped into a production environment like that, especially when people kind of think it a little bit as like a smash and grab kind of thing where they're just trying to find as many things. That's an interesting thought. If you have access to a real airport, we would love to talk to you, or some other environment where to do that. But we also have to kind of minimize at least some of the potential risks for that sort of thing. But it is a learning experience. The idea is that we try to make it as real as possible, but like if something bad happens, they're not going to kill people. So that is the thing we want to try to do.
Are you guys are you going to stick around?
Yeah, we'll stick around for a little bit, and if you have any other questions.